South Vietnam paid a high price, and of course over 1 million non-combatant deaths. It's not like they didn't fight. So to say, answer to the Vietnam War is that simple, South Vietnam's a failed state full of a bunch of cowards, well, got to be a little deeper than that. They did fight. They fought a long time. A lot of folks paid for it. Okay, why'd they fail then? Can't get into it too deeply here because we're not going to deal with Vietnamese history here that much. Well, first off, South Vietnamese government was awful. South Vietnamese military leadership, awful. Very much too tied to an old French colonial regime. Probably if you've heard anything about South Vietnam, that their government was full of graft and was corrupt. Yes. Okay, period, end of statement. That did happen. But let's get into that a little more deeply too. Well, let's get into another side of that. The other thing that we need to look at, well, first off, there's a map. I told you I had a map on here. The other thing I think we need to look at is the interrelationship between their flawed state and our very strong, powerful state. And it's that interrelationship where actually looking at a guy like Pham Van Dien and a guy like Tran Ngoc Way can really teach us some stuff. Because they were on the sharp end of the point the whole time. These are combat officers, mid-ranking officers. They're not the presidents, the four-star generals. These are guys in the field that know what's going on. And looking at them, you can see a lot. Here's a couple things to look at. And by the way, the reason I put the map up there, this is a weakness of the book, and I'll fully admit it. The book's about two guys, so it can't be fully representative of South Vietnam, can it? It's also about two very special guys in a very special place. These were South Vietnam's best, and they were in the best part of South Vietnam, this area way up here at the top called I Corps. Hue City, where these guys are both from, you can barely see it on the map. There it is. You see Quang Tri in the north and Tuat Tien just below it. You see Hue right there. This is I Corps. This is the best area of South Vietnam as far as their military is concerned, and they're in the best South Vietnamese division, the 1st Division. So right up front, I'll tell you, these guys and their positions are exceptional. So maybe we can't read too much from their experience, but I'm going to say we can. At least read some major things from it. First off, there's my screen again. When we came into the war, replacing the French in 1954, our answer for the South Vietnamese military, sure, we're going to train them. And by the way, for the older people in the room like myself, I think one of the problems is we evidently had Captain Kangaroo training them. Does that guy look like Captain Kangaroo to you?
He was a war hero.
He was.
World War II.
Yeah. But I never knew he served in Vietnam, but there he is. I think the resemblance is, I don't think it's really him. We chose to make the South Vietnamese military a carbon copy of our own. Heavily dependent on American logistics support, heavily dependent on American artillery support, air power support, you name it. Okay? Very good thing. They're going to win a lot of battles with our support. However, we've put a first world military and a first world military logistic structure on a third world nation. If we're not there, and guess what? I'm foreshadowing the future. We're not going to be there at the end. They're going to be incapable of supporting this military on their own. One of the arguments of my book is the South Vietnamese military wasn't Vietnamese enough to survive without us. With us, we were wiping the enemy all the way from one end of South Vietnam to the other. But if we went home, their ability to win would go with us. Second thing, well, obviously, this failed. The South Vietnamese military built on an American structure. The whole thing went something over tea kettle in 1965, or we wouldn't have had to send troops there. So it was a failed experiment in the first place. Then we sent our troops there, and actually, I would argue, that's one of the big mistakes of the war. We were not going to win that war for them. South Vietnam had to be worthy of its own survival. We could win all their battles for them, but we couldn't make that state sustainable for them. So their army is failing. And what do we? And their state and government are failing. And what do? We say, scoot over. We'll win the war for you. If the way to win that war is to make them sustainable, is that the right thing to do or the exact wrong thing to do? It's going to make them arguably much more dependent on us rather than independent of us. Now, initially, there's a huge military surge. Again, when we come in, we start laying waste to the Viet Cong and NVA. And the ARVN, the South Vietnamese Military Army of the Republic of Vietnam, by way of our humongous firepower, they start laying waste to the ARVN, to the NVA and the VC, which is often forgotten. South Vietnamese actions in battles over there are usually forgotten, but they were beating them too, but through our strength, not through their own. Essentially, I would argue that up until 1968, when things began to change under a different commander, our idea for the South Vietnamese military was probably wrong. It wasn't sustainable in their culture. And then our effort to save them actually made them more dependent. I mean, look at the South Vietnamese government. What lesson do they get from us saving them? No matter how crappy they are, we'll come save them. For the South Vietnamese military commanders, no matter how much graft they do instead of fighting, we'll save them. Real wrong message for these guys. This is South Vietnam's leading combat commander, General No Quang Trung, head of the 1st ARVN Division. General Norman Schwarzkopf called this guy the best tactical military commander he ever met. Here's what he had to say. Entering the war with the posture and disposition of a fire brigade, the Americans rushed around to save the Vietnamese house from destruction, but took too little interest in caring for the victims. Only after they realized that the victims too should be made firefighters to save their own houses did the Americans set about to really care for them. Valuable time was lost, and by the time the victims could get on their feet and began to move forward a few steps after recovery, the fire brigade was called back to the home station. It says a lot. Looking at the war from a South Vietnamese perspective as opposed to an American one, this says a lot. So arguably, I would say the South Vietnamese military was constructed along the wrong model, and then us getting in to do their business for them. We should have been making them do their business themselves. Could we have done that? Sure. Look at the U.S. advisory effort as opposed to the U.S. combat effort, and you'll see the South Vietnamese units fighting with our advisors a lot. So there's one kind of lesson from the book, is that you need to look at the Vietnam War in a different way to kind of think, fully understand it. Not just understand it from the American side, but understand it kind of holistically. A second thing that the book kind of indicates is that even to understand battles, you better look at the South Vietnamese. Every battle we fight in, every major one, remember Vietnam is full of little tiny battles where alert patrols and ambushes are out there where it's only Americans, but every big campaign also includes the South Vietnamese. And I think to understand even those tactical campaigns, you better understand South Vietnam. And I'm just going to give you two examples here. Oh, there's just another picture I forgot to show you. Probably the battle any Americans ever heard about Vietnam. Well, I'm going to name you the two battles you probably heard about. This is the Tet Offensive of 1968. And the one thing you've probably heard about that battle, if anything, is that the bad guys attacked every city, and there's a map of it, all the little explosions. Boom! That was for you, Jeffrey. I said there'd be a boom. Look at that. There's explosions on the map, and a boom, and everything. All those little explosions are cities attacked by the VC and the NVA. Okay? And if you know anything about the Tet Offensive, we beat hell out of them, and that restructured the war. What you probably haven't heard is that the Tet Offensive, it wasn't aimed at us. The Viet Cong knew they couldn't beat us. Any Viet Cong worth his salt knew, don't stand up to the Americans, they'll kill you. The offensive was aimed at the ARVN, the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, hoping they would collapse or maybe even join with the bad guys, and then everybody would be against us and we'd have to leave. And where this kind of comes to a head, this Tet Offensive, one group of Vietnamese versus another group of Vietnamese, was Hue City. Again, third boom from the top is Hue City. This is the Vietnamese imperial capital. It would mean an awful lot for the bad guys to take that. It would mean a lot psychologically for them to take and hold the imperial capital. So this is the one city, other than Saigon, they really want to take and hold. It's the site of the biggest battle of the Tet Offensive. The enemy hold that area for a little over a month, and in heavy house-to-house fighting, which you usually don't expect in Vietnam, it's taken back. And if you read any book about the Tet Offensive in the Vietnam War in Hue City, it's the Marines, the brave U.S. Marines that take back the city, and they do, by the way. The Marines do a hell of a lot of fighting in that citadel.